So up last we have Sam Brown from Doteveryone. Then we'll move on to the final panel session and hopefully get a couple of minutes for everyone to chat at the end as well.
Okay, hi. I'm going to have the opposite problem with this microphone. I'm very short. Okay. Hi. So I'm from Doteveryone. We're an independent think tank charity that's based in London. And we were formed in 2015 in order to tackle the inequalities and social challenges that digital technologies were introducing into society at that time. And since then, we've been doing a lot of research into the consequences and impacts of technology on various sectors and various communities. And we've had the probably not so enviable challenge of turning our research into actual useful ideas that can be implemented in the real world, which is what I'm going to talk about a little today. I suppose, challenge of going last in a conversation like this is actually quite a lot of what I wanted to share has been discussed today already. So I'll try not to rehash ground so much as maybe sum up and try and add a few points there, here and there. And then I'll kind of introduce something that we've created to move the conversation forward and, as you said, kind of put the rubber on the road. So we kind of operate like a startup, and we're incredibly pragmatic in how we approach things. And we've been working with technology makers in order to find ways to empower responsible innovators, build responsible business practices, and bring the idea of responsible technology and responsible AI as a cultural imperative to the tech sector. And that's why we formed the TechTransformed program, which is what I lead and what I'm going to share with you today. But largely it's centered on bringing in a consideration of context, consequences, and contributions of technology into the development process. So the way we work, and again, kind of a sum up of today, is that there's no single strategy or no single solution or no single sector that's going to be able to solve these problems. We need to be building stronger societal fabric and stronger societal structures for the future. And we need to be looking to the future of the things that we value as humans, such as care and work. We need to have digital understanding and digital empowerment of the public, of the civil sector, and of charities. And we need to have government that's able to understand these technologies in order to take proactive and bold steps in ensuring that they're going to be better for everyone and in common good. And mostly we need technology, or we need the organizations and the people who are making these technologies to do so responsibly. And we need to determine what exactly that means. And so that's where all of these insights and a lot of the research that we've done has been in these areas. So like any good product person, we actually kind of started with research into the people who are going to be using these technologies, because we realized if we want to develop frameworks and if we want to move this field forward of this field of ethics, as we're starting to call it, we need to actually understand the environment and the people who are going to be using the things that we develop. So we started by doing an in-depth collaborative cohort with 8 different startups in the UK around their business practices, looking to see if we could prove trustworthiness. We've conducted surveys with 40 scale-ups within the UK to see how they look to prove their trust to their users and other stakeholders. We conducted one-on-one interviews with people responsible for technology delivery, and actually, as of this week, we're launching a formal research project with Ipsos into attitudes within the tech sector in the UK around consequences and responsibility, which we also we're hoping to bring to other countries like North America, which is not a country, I'm sorry, the US and Canada. So yeah, I kind of want to share what we learned, but I want to reiterate one of the biggest challenges that we face is that terminology is not the same, and people in different sectors and in different areas, and even within the tech sector, are using completely different meanings for different things. And if we want to move forward, then we need to build a common language as the first thing that we do. And also, there are no easy answers. As one of our other speakers pointed out today, the same technologies that can be used for good can also be used for evil. And solutions that are good for one organization might not be good for another organization. And so any solutions that we look at building need to keep that reality in mind. So actually, I think Will did a really good job of kind of summarizing some of the attitudes here. But what we found when we did the interviews with people was that people were really starting to coalesce along a couple of common parameters, which was when asking about responsibility that they felt they had outside of their users or their shareholders, they either felt that it was fundamental to the success of their business, or it was something that was really nice to have but came after other imperatives such as monetization or growth. And we found that they were either looking internally, either to themselves as founders or within their business values for the answers to the really complex problems that were coming up, or they were looking externally to experts or people who worked in ethics to kind of solve these problems for them. And within that, we kind of came up with a couple of different categories and common themes of the types of people that were engaged in this conversation. And I'm not going to go into too much depth around these today, but you can come and find me afterwards. But actually, Will did a pretty good job of summarizing who some of these people are anyway. But the big thing that came out is largely that discussion is no longer enough. People are looking for solutions. So we have come to identify 3 different areas within the production development cycle that we think interventions are most likely to be effective. And that's within business planning, product management, and design. And I will kind of go a little bit more into these as we go forward. So this has kind of been touched on by quite a lot of people. Ethics actually really does mean implementing values, guiding principles, and determining who's responsible for those. What I want to add to this in a business context is that where values is really important is that the idea of business values, of business purpose, of a vision and a mission for what you are doing is a well-accepted and well-understood business concept at this point. There are fairly sophisticated mechanisms in place within organizations to uphold that, such as performance reviews and awards. But where there's a gap is that expectations of customers, of investors, and of employees, actually, if we want to talk about talent, is that a business and an organization actually lives those values not only in a behavioral context, such as be honest, but that extends to the business decisions that they make and the products and the services that they ship. And so what we actually need to do is fill the gap between opaque values at an organizational level and clear and measurable guidelines that apply to products and apply to services as they go out the door. And then determine who's responsible for upholding those and what are the mechanisms to ensure that that happens. And this is not just about technology solutions. So while technological tools are great, they are not always the answer. What actually is important is the people and the processes and the practices around those tools to ensure that they're implemented in the right way and that there's a shift in a culture and an understanding around what the responsibility needs to be. And lastly, social impact is the user needs. So I think it's been raised that a lot of harms that we see happening are not actually happening on an individual user consumer level. They're happening at a societal level. They're happening across the world within nations. And we actually did research into public attitudes. And out of that research, we found that while people were quite happy with individual technology products and how they'd shaped their personal lives, they didn't see the same benefit for society as a whole. And we kind of need to remedy that, and we need to do a much better job of designing from the very, very beginning to include this, the social factor and the consequences on that. So I'm just going to quickly introduce what we have come up with in order to move the dial on this. So this is designing for consequences. What we heard from our research more and more was that there was no clear and formal point within the development process where you could have these conversations about the consequences of what you were doing in that moment. And especially within a constantly changing environment where you have many different pressures and you're trying to ship quickly, taking that time and that space to have these conversations in a useful way didn't exist. And so we said, well, let's make something. So we've created a new Agile event to fit into an iterative development cadence, and it's called consequence scanning. And the purpose is mostly to allow organizations and the people within them to reflect on the impact and consider the potential consequences of what they're making. And it's designed to be familiar. It's designed to fit into a development process that already exists. And I think one of their speakers had pointed out on the panel this earlier, the maturity of the tech sector in many ways, and especially in startups, isn't quite there. They aren't used to other types of government structures, but they are used to working in a very quick and agile way. And so this is the first step towards introducing this type of thinking. So we aligned this with all of the similar attributes of Agile, mainly that it's lightweight. Yeah, right. Sorry. Mainly that it's lightweight and it's very simple to understand, but it's incredibly difficult to master because the critical, creative, and systems thinking that you need is new. But because it's meant to be iterative and done often, hopefully you will learn new patterns of thinking as you go. So the entire point of the event is to answer these 3 questions. What are the intended and unintended consequences of what you are doing? What are the positive consequences that we want to focus on? And I think this is a key point because consequences are not inherently negative. Quite often what we can be trying to do is going to be a really, really good thing. But on the flip side, they might not be so positive. What are those consequences that we want to mitigate or we want to offset? And this could be quite difficult for some people because it's very hard to face the fact that what you're creating could be put to ill use. But to be directly confronted with that fact and be forced to answer it can be really, really helpful. And this kind of addresses what we've found is some of the leaders of the biggest technology companies today have come out and said, we just didn't think about the consequences of what we are making in the first place. And so simply doing that is the first step to starting to mitigate that. And also, consequences are not just at a user level. As I mentioned, societal impact is the new harm. So we've included a few prompts to kind of make people think beyond simply their user interactions. And mainly at a societal level, we've kind of asked, well, what does this actually mean if everyone in the world were doing this? And so this is where within your iterative development process it should take place. Largely speaking, we think it should be done at the point where you've got your idea for your product, you're doing your initial product roadmap, and every time that you're doing a feature. This should take place before you've actually done work, because once you've started doing the work, usually you become much more attached to your ideas and much less likely to change course. So this is the first thing that you should be doing once you want to start introducing things. And I would like to point out that it's really important to do it at a feature level as well, because if you don't, there's a really high chance that you're going to miss things. And the event is designed to surface consequences and ideas that are actionable. So this is not a talking exercise. It's designed specifically for you to have direct actions that you can take into the next round of your planning or put into your backlog, or flag as having to be something that you solve in another level or bring other stakeholders into. And we've created a structure that will help you ideate this and also address the barriers that you might have around seniority and the stakeholders that you need in the room. I'm not going to go too much into what exactly the structure is at the moment, but mostly the really key point for this event is that we recommend having a truly cross-functional and multidisciplinary participation within this event. So this extends to some of your collaborators from other technology specialists, such as security. This is a really good way to start to build really robust security frameworks and raise the consequences of not having a secure system early on. As well as marketing, customers representatives, or your sales team, because they're going to have an inherently different perspective on your users than you. They're going to provide some of that multidisciplinary input, and it also holds them accountable and responsible for some of the consequences that their actions may have and how they explain your product to your users. Okay, and so I did finish on time. Look at me. That was a fly-by whistle-stop tour of what we've been working on. There's a lot more than just that. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested afterwards. But mostly, we hope that everybody's looking to be a responsible innovator if they're in this room here in whatever context they happen to be operating within. Thank you.